It's nice to see you all. It's nice to see the people that I traveled with, because I've been away from the group for a week. For those of you who don't know, I've been in Vietnam for a week after the group. The group sort of splintered there on Friday a week ago. So we all said goodbye. They went home. Some went to Japan. Tim went to Myanmar. He and I just came back yesterday. Obviously, we have people from our group that are all over other churches. Some are not well. Some can come today. But it's a special treat to do this trip with these people. Thank you all for supporting us. Obviously, I had to write this on a plane in the dark last night. I thought I would have the daylight because we're flying in the daylight, but they turned all the lights down and turned all the shades down. I was there in the dark. So here is my heart to share about this trip and to put it in a little bit of a context. But before we go on, I got to say hello to the Kellys. Isn't it nice to have the Kellys back today? Why don't you stand, let people just wave at you here and just say, hey, how are the Kellys? To have them here. Finally got the hairstyle right, and it's good. Thank you. They're a driving truck and not here, but this is part of your home still somehow. Many of you have heard this before, but this is an old mission joke that I used with some few people on the trip. And it was very real to us, those of us who grew up over there. About the family that went overseas. They had seen other missionaries come back out of it, out of touch with culture, dressing, wearing weird clothes. So every year they would make sure they got catalogs and send them to Africa, and they would have someone make clothes exactly like what was in the catalog. So they would always stay in the groove. They came back, they're walking through the airport, everybody's staring at them. They got in the car and they said, why is everyone staring at us? We know we're dressed right. And they said, they're not used to seeing people carry their suitcases on their head. This adjustment of how to live and negotiate with this other world that we're in. And it is different, and we certainly struggled with that growing up overseas and coming back. And there are some very cool things about mission. You saw some of the things that we got to do. And I've been able to go to see the Taj Mahal and go to Victoria Falls, and you can baptize 1,000 people in the afternoon. But there's another side, and I just wanted to kind of thought that through a little bit today. Not counting the $2,100 that virtually everyone had to pay for this, and the 20 hours of flying each way, and taking all their vacation time to go. We had police coming to every site in Sabah. We had to submit our sermons, our ideas, our sermon notes to the police. So we had to be careful with that. We had one of our group end up in a hospital, and in an ambulance with Tim Parks and Judy all the way down to Kota Kinabalu. I saw her again today because she had to come home. So you have that sometimes. You can go into a Vietnamese restaurant and they order for you, and here you are with food that I had never seen or tasted, and they give you chopsticks to eat. I basically learned chopsticks this week. The morning at the shower, when Earl and Julia's little wedding reception up there, we were all in a place. I was the last, I think, into the shower, and I was covered with soap when the water ran out. All my clothes from the Sabbath afternoon baptism were soaking wet. I hung them and some other key clothes on a line that was behind it. Thought it was very cool. I was getting all these clothes dried out. By the time I went to get them, it had rained. Soaking wet, everything I had. It was hot. Sabah was incredibly hot. Singapore more, and Vietnam worse. 40 degrees centigrade, over 100 degrees, 90 plus humidity. Just unbearable. There were nights at our site, we had the main downtown 1,000 people a night site. The lights and all the sound went out how many times? You're just standing there and there's nothing. You're standing in the dark, waiting for someone to fix this. One night, the sound went out 2 minutes before the end of the sermon, right at the appeal. Nothing. 1,000 people try to shout to the crowd and just say, this is hard. There was a night the translator, I was preaching on the Sabbath, I think the translator somehow missed every single punchline and the conclusion of every story. Wonderful man. And I'm talking right here. What made the difference? He just missed it. And you just say, this is hard. The bathrooms I had to use a few times. And you go and you have to baptize, and then you come to a little room that has a hole in the floor and a jar of water and no toilet paper and slime all over the floor, and you have to change your clothes and come out looking nice for the rest of the day. And it's just hard. You baptize in the sun. You baptize barefoot on the rocks in the ocean. We had to baptize in the rain last year. And the year we had all the waves knock us over in the baptism. It's just hard. The last weekend at Saba, I was up a good share of the night. I had to preach again at 8:30 in the morning. You finish one sermon, again at 8:30 in the morning. We had to practice the quartet, get back to the room, go to bed at 1:30 or 2, get up again at 6 or 6:30, race down to preach. And you're just exhausted and you see what you have to do the rest of the day. We walked how far in the sun to get to the baptism? They had to bulldoze the pool because it had dried out in the hot season. So you go down into these rocks that were bare and then baptize in the sun. Then you go back to a room covered with windows to change your clothes, to change. Remember that? Then you go to an afternoon program for 2 hours with every choir within an hour singing, and you cannot close your eyes, you can't go to sleep, you can't rest because everyone's watching to see whether you enjoy this or not. Wonderful program. And then you all get in your cars and we went out to the church dedication. And then you race back and you have another couple hour program, cultural program is fantastic. And then another couple hours, they're picking all the system down. Remember? It's hot. It's a long day. It's hard. It's hard. And then we got to Singapore. I had to go find Mr. Rojas here. So I got out last of the airport, and the 2 trucks had not come. And we had 50 people standing in the sun, waiting because our luggage, the trucks hadn't come. Difficult. We finally got to the union office and didn't know where to put our stuff, so we put it in a corner. I thought we better move it inside, so we got 10, 12 of us and made a little chain, moved it all inside, and then the lady came around the corner and she said, no, you can't put it there, you better put it upstairs. Get everyone off the bus and move it upstairs again in the heat. It's hard. And then we went to the botanical gardens and we had 50 people and 49 were in the bus. Everyone was there except one, the oldest one in our group. 77 years old. What can you do? Can't leave him here, even though he's from Singapore. And so we divided up. I said, I need 10 guys. And so we got a map and we decided we would go every trail in this botanical gardens. We cannot leave him. Where would he be? All of a sudden he showed up, was giving a Bible study to a Hindu family on the Sabbath. Stand up, Dr. Lee. Let everyone love you a little bit. Here he is. I made a little list of the top 10 hard times over the years. There may be more that I didn't think of quickly. The first year in Thailand, got to the hotel, 40 young people in the hot sun, and they had given away all of our rooms in the hotel. The night we had up in the mountain tribes, and I saw our bus driver drinking. And I sat next to him for 3 hours the next morning, all the way down the curvy mountain road, ready to grab the wheel if he did any mistake. Couldn't couldn't let this man who was drinking wreck any of our kids' lives. A time the airline sold the seats of 4 of our kids, and we had no more seats on the plane. All the nights when people have been mad at the hotel or mad at the food or mad at the transportation, blackouts in the hotel, no air conditioning, cold showers, writing sermons by candlelight on the floor in my room. Not supposed to be the rainy season, rained every single day of the whole trip. Just stuff, and it's missions. And you ask yourself sometimes, why do I do this? Is it worth it? And Jesus says, count the cost in Luke chapter 14, verse 28. If you have a Bible, you can read it in this passage where Jesus is talking about taking up your cross, denying yourself and taking up a cross. And he says, count the cost. Think about it before you make a commitment. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there is enough money to finish it? Count the cost. Add it all up and decide if this is really worth it. C.S. Lewis has a famous sermon called Slip of the Tongue. He said, how many of us have gotten caught up in the moment in a week of prayer or under the moonlight on a week of prayer Friday night or an evangelistic series, and your heart is touched and there's soft music and so God is speaking to you and you come forward and you make promises. And you'll say, I'm going to go to church more. I'm going to read the Bible better. I'm going to pay more tithe. I'm going to. And you make some vow. And then in the morning, you regret what you promised in the moment. He calls it a slip of the tongue. Is it really worth it? He said, count the cost. Think it all through to say, is it really worth it? And so I ask you today, our mission trips and getting involved in the community and working in community services and beginning to want to do more ministry into our community, is it worth it? And maybe we would say it would not be worth it if you left out baptizing the 300 people. Every single one of them precious to see their face. We don't know them. 50-some young people from Sarah Mae and Nathan's week of prayer. Kids. And they come out on the water to the 15, 18 of us, baking hot sun. You'll see, I don't know if you have any pictures, I'm there, one of the ones with the handkerchief on my head. And kid comes out to you, and you ask them their name, and you try to get it, and then you listen for them to say the formula, and I hear the word spiritus, or some word that sounds like spirit, and I baptize. And they come out, and they just get this biggest grin. And when you come out of the water and they want to take pictures with you, it would not be worth it if you left that story out. I did week of prayer every morning for the high school kids, 170 kids. At the end, they gave me gifts and they gave me an envelope where a whole class had written notes, and some of the notes said, Pastor Dan, we agree with you on your picture of God. I was so hot in there, I could hardly stand it. I was so hot. Walk a few blocks and just be soaked in sweat. And then you get a note like that. I tried to get over early to see and support Sarah Mae and Nathan in their week of prayer. And they taught these kids how to do a little, whatever that song that was, Jesus Loves Me or something. And after a while, just as soon as they stood up, before they even announced the song, they were already beginning to go. 550 kids. We raised the money on the trip to build an open-air auditorium for them. Some people sent the money. Preaching to 2,000 people last Sabbath, 150 kids standing up on the front of the platform, singing, Worthy is the Lamb. You saw some of it in there. A moment that none of us were there will ever forget. It's just not worth it if you leave out the church dedication. 3 of our people put in $10,000. The government gave money. Where have you heard about a government giving money for a church? Well, they did. We went out there that morning, hot, hot, hot place. A church member had given some land. He was there ready to build. The women's ministry had planted this church over the years, meeting in someone's house. They had almost finished it. They had left a cement for us to do and painting. We didn't have a group of young people like my sons and all of that group that usually do this. There was only people our age. Sarah Mae, Nathan, one other girl, the youngest ones we had, Sonny. And most of them were busy doing week of prayer and clinics and other places. So those of us in our 50s and 60s trooped out there to do that church. The mixer died within a few hours. So they had to do what they call a volcano method, where there was a cement, and they just pour rock and dirt and sand and gravel and water, and 8 of them just mixing. It's brutal work. And then you wheelbarrow it in and cement this place. Tim and I, others, were mostly doing painting. And they just go cut branches off the tree and stick it in, and you're trying to roller up to the top of this church. 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of yellow. Hard, hard work. And I said, let's have a little dedication. I told Josh the last day, Josh, can we do a little porch out here? So that when they come for the dedication, we can walk in on this little porch. So we did one more volcano and one more load to do that thing out in front. And we left this church that had stuff everywhere and just kind of dirty and a mess. We drove out there Sabbath afternoon, just had this hour-and-a-half window, skipping supper, we thought, to come to it. I will never forget walking into that church. And they had work from Friday afternoon until Saturday night. There were 100 chairs in there. Every chair was filled. They had put up little curtains. There's no windows in the windows yet. They put little curtains in the windows. They had a little light hanging. They had put a cloth over the platform. They had a little pulpit they borrowed from somewhere. They borrowed a projector from somewhere. There was a little screen in the corner. They had put some plants, and they had fixed it up, and it was jam-packed. It was like a church, right? I'll never forget it. None of this would be worth it until you have moments like that. I called up the people who had built it, worked there for months, worked with us, just came up beaming, so proud of what they had done. Amazing. Amazing. It's not worth it if you leave out the cold mango drinks in the lobby at the hotel after the meeting, and the soft ice cream a couple nights with a few of our people. If you leave out all the people who want to take pictures with you, if you leave out Julia and Earl's wedding reception up on the side of a mountain with the most amazing wedding outfits you have ever seen, would you stand, let the whole church just see this? Turn. I have my jacket. I didn't have time to change into it. But because I had the jacket, they had me beat the gong. So I beat the gong to lead Earl into the reception. I ended up being the best man. I sat next to Earl. I said, Earl, 3 years ago when you walked into this church, did you have any idea 3 years later you'd be sitting in a wedding reception in Saba with that hat on? And all of a sudden, in the middle of this reception, they had these little funky Saba instruments, little gongs and instruments, and this little xylophone thing on the floor. And next thing we knew, the bride herself, who hadn't played this thing in years, sat on the floor and began to play. She is incredible at that thing. Good for you, Julia. Unbelievable. A special night. A few months ago, she had cancer and was in the city of hope. And I said to her, I'm not going to your home place if you don't go. And she made it, and we had a great, great experience. It's not worth it if you leave out the swinging bridges up on the top of the trees, eating dinner, looking out over the mountains, the cultural program that night, the day at the beach, the dinner under the trees, looking out over the ocean, the orchids in Singapore and the night lights of the downtown in Singapore, the laser show. We're sitting there, and here's this laser show. They spray water, and somehow there's pictures on the water. I don't know how they do it. Unbelievable. I said, we're sitting here on the other side of the world. If you left out the breakfast at the Hyatt, and if you left out the dinner Thursday night at the top of the 65th floor in Hanoi, and the 10 house churches that I've been in this week, where pastors take their living room and turn it into a little church, and we walk in and they gather around and we have prayer for the little house church. And the pastor lost his father in 1975 when he was 7 years old and took the father away. And the pastor has not seen the father from that day till now. And he grows up, and with no education, he becomes the pastor of this little church. And we have a prayer with him. And we're going to try to help finish a church that's going to take 5 of those house churches and make it into one church. And they want me to be the one in 2017 to go and preach a crusade in that church. And we prayed on that property where they are building the foundations of that church. And if you leave out that I've seen the Taj Mahal and the Victoria Falls and Mother Teresa's place in Calcutta and 1,000 other moments with people and pastors and groups, it would not be worth it if you left all that out. Even Jesus had to count the cost. When he was there in the garden and Satan is whispering, it's not worth it, no one's going to care, you're going to never see your father again, and all the rest. And Jesus had to count the cost at that fork in the road and weigh whether the cross was worth it. And Hebrews says, for the joy set before him, he endured the shame of the cross. He decided it was worth it. For the moment 1,000 years later, when he would stand at the first worship service in heaven and give the church back to the Father, that was the joy that was set before him. And he decided it was worth it to go to the cross for that moment. And we're told he would have done that for just one. We baptized 30 in Tonga. I don't know how many in Thailand. We baptized 300 this time. And I asked myself on the plane last night, would I have flown all the way over there and done what I just did for the last 3 weeks if we had only baptized one? But Jesus was willing to come down here and do what he did for the joy of one. Which means Jesus thinks doing heaven with just you would be worth what he did on the cross. That's what that means. Well, I wrote down a few lessons real quick to wrap this up. Number 1, yes, there's going to be stress and suffering and sacrifice no matter how close you get to God. People think if you can just pray harder or have more faith or go on mission trips, you're the best. God will bless you more and things should be easy. No, even the best have hard times, and mission trips are hard, and serving is hard, and coming on Wednesday morning to do community services is hard sometimes. And staying up there to wash the dishes after the potluck, and there are parts that are hard in serving God. And you have to decide if it is worth it. Number 2, the good stuff is always worth the hard stuff. Amen? Amen. Was it worth it? David, was it worth it? Huh? Was it worth it? I saw pictures of you in Vietnam, Charlie. We're going through a book of pictures in the Chinese church in Vietnam. And I said, I know him. You were there. He has been in Ethiopia and Philippines and Sabah, and he's going to Thailand next week, soon. 77 years old. It's worth it. It's worth it. Swindoll tells a story of going up to go canoeing, whitewater rafting in Oregon, where I was, Rogue River. And he says, I was with my son, and there were old canoes and there were new canoes. And I thought, we better get one of the new canoes. So while they're giving all the instructions, he and I slid over so that we would buy the new canoes. When it came time to grab a canoe, we would get one of the new canoes. And he looked inside himself. It is our human nature to want to be stress-free and to be comfortable and to just have a good time without the hard. And so we wilt away. And everyone has to decide, is the hard stuff of serving worth? And we would say the good stuff is always worth the hard stuff. It's worth it if you look past it. Number 3, the good stuff almost always comes after you go through the hard stuff. Isn't it true? Most of the fun stuff of a mission trip comes later at the end. After you've been hot, after you can't change any money, after the hard parts. Then comes the baptism, and then comes going to the beach, and then comes the New Zealand ice cream afterwards. Jesus had to go through the cross before he gets to come on the clouds and take everybody to heaven. And you have to look past it all and just say, okay, the beach is coming, that is coming, there's going to be some of that. Eventually this will all be worth it. And Jesus says, behold, I'm coming soon, and my reward is with me. Number 4, the good stuff doesn't have to get equal time with the hard stuff. You can slave away with the cement and painting for 30 hours, and 1 hour church dedication makes it all worthwhile. Amen? It doesn't have to be 30-30 or 35-30. It's just that you can get Bible studies for months and then 2 minutes in the baptistry, and it's all worth it. And you'll say, okay, that was good. And a mother can go through 9 months and then 24 hours of labor and a moment and the first hug with that little baby. It's all worth it. Doesn't have to get equal time. Number 5. I hope this point will make sense. Eventually, the pleasure begins to come backward even into the hard stuff. We don't just go through the hard in order so that eventually we have the reward at the other end. There comes a moment where just the heart has a certain pleasure to it. Did you find that? When you're mixing cement, when you're doing the clinics, and when you're painting in the sun, when you know you're doing it for Jesus, when you know what you're doing is really going to matter, it's going to make a difference, and this is making people well, people are going to be in heaven because of what you're doing. There's going to be a church here for the next 50 years. There's going to be this thing. You know you're making a difference. Put some pleasure into it. And the people that you are doing it with, that you are in this battle with this together. There came a night when I said to Dave and Tim, we did music and this painting and all this together. I just said to them, it has been a pleasure to serve Jesus with you this week. Amen? You remember? It was a pleasure to be with this group of people at my site, with Josh and Rose and Andre, Sonny, Andrew, this group that did this building and music and this worship together. Even when it was hard, it was a pleasure to do it with these people who are servants of God. You understand what I'm trying to say? And there's a sweetness to it that is hard to replace. A couple more things before I'm done. Some of you have heard about this already. We got there Friday morning. And we're in Hanoi. Unbelievable, surreal to be in Da Nang. I walked on the beach in Da Nang on Thursday night. Wednesday night, I guess. Where the Marines came onto the beach. And here I am walking in the moonlight at 11 o'clock at night. Unbelievable. For those who are like me who grew up in the Vietnam War time, to think, what am I doing here? So now we're in Hanoi. I'm in a restaurant in the morning eating breakfast. I got the newspaper, and here is John McCain on the front of this newspaper. And he had been in Hanoi the day before. So the other people came, and I said, look at this. McCain himself is here. And we talked about, what if they take him to his prison? We were going to go to that prison that day. What if they take him to that prison, and they close it up, and we can't get in? The one day I'm here. I'm flying today. We got in the car, we went to the place just right there in Hanoi. We parked, we went inside, we got our ticket, and we walked in about 10 feet, and we turned around, and in walked John McCain. True story. Unbelievable. And 3 other senators, and ambassador, a bunch of other people. The guy I was with used to be in Washington, D.C. for many years, Ralph Watts. He said, morning, Senator. shook hands with all these senators, talked with them, and we got to go through McCain's museum prison with John McCain. How good is that? I didn't know if we could take pictures or not, so we tried to hang back, but eventually other people were, so pretty soon I'm like everyone else, had my camera way up high taking pictures. This is the jumpsuit that McCain came out of the plane with when he ejected from the plane, landed in a lake there. We went to the lake. And we were there, John McCain, standing next to it and talking about it and explaining it. They asked him how it was to be in prison and what was the hardest thing about the beatings and the food. They show you pictures there of them eating and Christmas and letters and good health care and playing basketball and volleyball. And he said, that's for propaganda. That is not what it was all the time, every day for those years. 5 minutes either way, we would have missed John McCain. Here's my point. If we had not gone there, we would not have seen John McCain. We didn't go in order to see John McCain. We just went to go. And then there's surprise, and John McCain comes walking in. Tom Sine wrote a famous line in a book called On Service. He says, happiness is a surprise of a life given in service. You don't serve in order to get the blessing. You don't serve. You just serve to serve. You serve to serve Jesus. You serve because there's a need. They need a church. They need to get well. You serve. But when you're there, Jesus comes walking into the door of your heart. And that's a surprise. And that little glow that you feel when you know that you're doing something for God, you're just doing it, all of a sudden this glow comes into you. Is Jesus walking in the door to be with you. And once I've tasted it, it is a pleasure that I cannot replace any other way. Last story. Yesterday morning, which is quite a while ago now for me, they took me to the last house church in Hanoi. We had no work at all from the 30s until 4 years ago. It's a communist country, not allowed to go. It's the capital of the country. Now the whole world is coming to Hanoi. 93 million people. This market has opened up. Every country is coming. Every business is going. All the companies are building factories there. Big freeway, new airport, big hotels. We stayed in a lovely hotel. And then they drove me out to this little house church. They sent a blind man. Do we have a picture of it up there? Does anyone, Connor, can you find that? More. Somewhere fine. That's the property. That's the property. Can you go further? Any more pictures? There. Blind man. He was dating a lady in the 80s, and they broke up in 86. She got mad, and she threw acid on his face. And now he's blind. A few years ago, we met this lady. They got married. They sent him up to plant a church in Hanoi 4 years ago where there was no believers at all. I asked him, how do you do this? She rides a motorcycle. He rides on the back. They go. He has learned Braille. I have pictures somewhere in my file of the Braille, only the Gospels. He has listened to enough audio. He has learned the Bible stories and Bible studies, and he can give them off the top of his head. And he has one now. Started with 5, gradually has 20 now. They meet upstairs, and 4 flights of stairs we had to go up. They meet in the living room of a little house. They make $100 a month. The mission pays $200 for the house and for the little church. $300 a month for this church. And he's won 20 people blind for the last 4 years. I said, how do you do it? He goes to a Sunday church. And he tells them about the Sabbath. I'm not recommending just telling what he does, all right? They got so mad at him because he had won some of the people from their church. They sent his name to all the Sunday churches they could get their hands on and said, don't let this man into your church. He'll take people away. So he changed his name. They finally took a picture of him and they sent the picture to all the churches. Don't let this man into your church. He has been picked up by the police 18 times. He said, now they're his friends. The police at the beginning was a low-level police. Now he's the chief of that area, and it's his friend. We took pictures there. We prayed for them. He prayed for us. And they want me to come in 2017 and do 4 nights of evangelism in that place. Is that okay? Is it worth it? To think that 40 years ago I was in college and watching as our people, as we went through the war and the pilots coming back and all of that. To think of what Hanoi meant to us 40 years ago. And that they would like me to come for 4 nights. It's all they allow you to preach. You have to give all your sermons to them ahead of time. They have to review to be sure you don't say anything wrong about the government, but you can preach your message. Ted Wilson was the first one from the General Conference to do 4 nights in the Ho Chi Minh City. And it looks like I'll get to be the second if everything goes this way. And preach in Hanoi. They're hoping to have 100 people there. The property has gone up so much that that property that they would like to buy is $3 million. And they're agonizing. We took video. I'm sending the video to the General Conference so they can try to decide. The mission doesn't have it. Someone's going to have to find $3 million so we can have a church in Hanoi. Is it worth it? You have to decide. Yes, there are days that are really, really hard. Really hard. And then there are these moments that are exquisite and holy and pure. And Jesus says, count the cost before you begin to get involved in service or mission. And someday, we won't just have a few minutes or an hour church dedication. Someday, we will have forever. Forever. Will it be worth it to choose the life that you have chosen? Anyway, and we will sing, worthy is the Lamb.